Thank you for coming, and welcome on behalf of our NGO, One Democratic State in Palestine. My name is Blake Alcott. I'm currently the director of this NGO. And each of you would have found pamphlets describing us and the principles of One Democratic State on your chairs, so I won't explain it here. There's a reading list on the back page of books about ODS. And an essential reading that we also put on the list is Ilan Pappé's The Ethnic Cleansing of Palestine. Thanks to Merav Pinchasov, Eddie Powell, and Caroline Rooney, the four of us organized this. There are four things I have to mention. The toilets are when you go out that way. We should leave by 9. Well, actually, we can run over a little bit, but we have to wind down around 9. Please do not take photographs of anybody in the audience. But if you want to take pictures of the panel, please do it within the next 5 or 10 minutes, because after that it will disturb people. And although you've already paid for a ticket, if you're extremely happy about the evening or about ODS, I believe there are 2 buckets, right, Jeff? There are 2 collection buckets that will be at the exit at the end. Our chair tonight is Dr. Ruba Saleh. Her family comes from Haifa and Jaffa. She received her PhD from Sussex University and is now a reader at SOAS, University of London. There she is a member of the Centers for Gender Studies and for Diaspora Studies. She has recently worked on migration in Europe and is now focused on Palestinian refugees. Please, also another little thing, turn your phones off, of course, or silent. Okay, Ruba, Gideon, Ilan, thank you very much for coming here to speak.
Thank you very much, Blake, and thank you, everyone, for coming tonight, and mainly thank you to Gideon, Levy, and Ilan Pappé for being with us, and thank you for inviting me to moderate this fantastic event tonight. So I will introduce our 2 speakers who, of course, don't need much introduction, but I think it's still due as a celebration of their role and work that they've done. And then I will conduct the evening by asking a few questions and then open it up to the floor for a debate, for a discussion. So Ilan Pappé, as most of you, of course, know, is an Israeli historian and activist. He's a professor at the College of Social Sciences and International Studies at the University of Exeter, and he's the founder and director of the European Center for Palestine Studies at the University of Exeter. Before coming to the UK, he was teaching at the University of Haifa in Israel, where he was directing the Emil Tuma Institute for Palestinian Israeli Studies. I think that, there is no way to list all the books that Ilan has written, and there are more than 10, 12 books. So I won't be able to go through all of them, but I would like to mention some of the latest work, The Biggest Prison on Earth, A History of the Israeli Occupation of Palestine, which has just really come out in 2015. The Forgotten Palestinian, A History of the Palestinian Minority in Israel, 2011. The book is written with Noam Chomsky, Gaza and Crisis, and of course the very celebrated Ethnic Cleansing of Palestine, which was a paradigm shift book for the Palestine question. The other guest tonight is renowned journalist Gideon Levy, who was born in Tel Aviv from parents who escaped from Czechoslovakia in the late 30s. He's, of course, as you all very well know, an active spokesperson for the Palestinian suffering in Israel and the West Bank and Gaza. He's an editorialist in the newspaper Haaretz and regularly contributes to other media outlets. He has, for 25 years, written a column entitled Twilight Zone on the hardships of life in the occupied West Bank and Gaza Strip, which also gave the title to his book, Twilight Zone, Life and Death Under Israeli Occupation. Another book that he's written is titled The Punishment of Gaza, which was published in 2010. And Gideon is also the recipient of many, many awards. And again, the list is so long, I will just like to mention a prize that he won in 2015, the Olof Palme Prize for Human Rights, which was awarded to him together with the Palestinian pastor from Bethlehem, Mitri Rahib, for their fight against occupation and violence. So a very warm welcome to our guests, speakers tonight. I think I would like to start by asking a question about the right of return, and particularly Blake mentioned a little bit the history of my family. My parents and grandparents were born in Haifa and Jaffa, and as well as my parents and many other Palestinians, they fled in 1948, and they became refugees together with 800,000 Palestinians. Today, this number has grown to 5 million of people in the world. Some of them still live in very grim lives in refugee camps. They have been deprived of rights. They have been considered guests in the host countries where they have fled, even when they have received citizenship rights. And at the same time, they haven't been allowed return to their homeland. Of course, we know that the Nakba didn't stop in 1948. It's an ongoing project of dispossession that takes place on a daily basis. And no place is really home for Palestinians. There is no safety in most of the countries where they have fled up until today. And of course, we know that many scholars have produced outstanding scholarship that tried to defeat the paradigm, the Israeli Zionist notion that there is no space for all of us in the land. Salman Abu Sitta, a very well-known Palestinian political scientist and geographer and demographer, has written a book that showed that there is space for everyone if we all wanted to return, that there isn't a question of space. And other sociologists have shown that, in fact, everyone, the right of return is a right that should be given, but it is by no, there is no, not at all, any reason to think that 5 million of people will want actually to return. So my question to you is, that on the other hand, Israel has always represented this issue of the right of return in terms of an apocalypse, like the idea that there would be an apocalyptic move, that it will mean a new exodus for the Israeli Jews, and still is refusing to be held accountable for what led to the catastrophe, to the Nakba. So my question to both of you, and I guess you would choose who wants to start answering the question, is what do you think of the right of return for Palestinians, and how do you see the right of return as building into a vision of a once democratic state for all, rather than as a threat to the existence of Israeli Jews?
So kind, you know.
No, we start with the light stuff, right of return. So you take the light stuff and I'll get to the real core.
Okay. Yes, I think that in the hindsight of 70 years since 1948, we have a very clear idea what lies behind the official Israeli rejection of the right of return. And this is not any worries about the capacity of the country to absorb new people. In fact, Israel is built on the notion that it can absorb many more millions only if they are Jews, or at least considered to be Jews. So it's not a question of capacity. It's a question of ideology. It's, to put it bluntly and simply, it's a racist position. We have a very good proof for this. There are 300,000 internal Palestinian refugees inside Israel. And even the claim that a return of Palestinians would change the demographic balance between Jews and Palestinians does not stand the test of proof, because these Palestinians are citizens of Israel. So allowing them to return to their villages would not change the demographic balance between Jews and Palestinians inside Israel. So why doesn't Israel not allow these Palestinians to return, and it would never allow these Palestinians, not even one of them, to return. And this has to do with a settler colonialist ideology, which totally excludes the native population, whether the ones who are still there, or those under occupation, or those who were expelled from any equal status, either as a human being or as a citizen in the Jewish state. So I think one has to understand that the basic rejection of the right of return is, I would say, the consequence or inevitable outcome of the Zionist ideology. The same ideology that led Israel to expel these people is the same ideology that prevents them from coming back to their homeland. So I think where this was maybe wasn't very clear in recent years, I think now we have an easier task in a way in showing that. I would add, and with this I would end, and then maybe we can develop it a bit later on. I would add another aspect that sometimes escapes the attention of anyone who's engaged in conversation about the right of return. I recall a public debate in TV I had with the late Pundak. What was his first name? The young one. Ron Pundak, who was one of the architects of the Oslo Accord. And we were debating the right of return. And he said something very honest from his perspective. He said, you do realize that even if it would have been possible for Palestinian refugees to return, most of Israel would look like Wadi Ara. Wadi Ara is one of the places of concentration where Palestinian citizens live today. There are three places, the Nakab, the Galilee, and in the east, Wadi Ara. And I said, even if it's true, what's wrong with that? I mean, I really enjoy seeing Palestinian villages. And he really did not understand he didn't think I was honest. He really thought it couldn't be that someone who grew as an Israeli Jew would like to see Israel with an Arab landscape, with even an Eastern Mediterranean landscape. This is why the Zionist movement brought not only European immigrants, but also European trees to cover the Palestinian villages, and was very reluctant to bring Jews from the Arab countries because they were Arabs, and they had to de-Arabize them, which they did quite successfully. I think that's also part of this. It's not only not accepting the accountability for what they did to the Palestinians, it's not only protecting the Jewish nature of the State of Israel, it's continuing the fabrication that Israel or Palestine is not part of the Arab world and not part of the Middle East, which lies at the very heart of this attitude.
Thank you.
Yeah. I wish I had such a crowd back home. Things would have been so much better and easier. Ever since I remember myself, even in times in which I was still a good boy Israel or a good boy Tel Aviv, when I did the right things and I served in the army and even worked with Shimon Peres, which is even worse, I can tell you that I was exposed to spreading fears. Everything was fearful. The 67 borders, Ilan, you remember, were defined by Abba Eban as Auschwitz borders, not less than this. Swine flu was presented in Israel as an existential threat. The regime in Israel throughout the years, and especially the current government, but also others, based their survival, based their ideology on spreading fears. And everything was always represented to us, even as children, as enemy. All the Arabs want to throw us to the ocean. Gamal Abdel Nasser should be compared to Adolf Hitler, and we used to burn his puppet in Lag BaOmer. It's a Jewish holiday where we light fires. We used to burn a puppet of Nasser because he is such a enemy. He wants to throw all of us to the ocean. And the return was another subject, maybe the biggest subject of this fearful reality that we were living in. It was almost illegitimate to mention it at all. It's also today illegitimate to mention it at all. Like it is illegitimate in Israel to dare to define yourself as non-Zionistic, God forbid. It is as illegitimate as to dare to claim that Palestinians and Israelis are equal human beings and the Palestinian people and the Jewish people gain or should gain the same rights. But the right of return was really dead demon. And I'm not surprised that Ron Pundak was reacting as he reacted. And this goes together hand with our main subject tonight, and this is the one-state solution. The one-state solution was perceived until 1-2 years as something that you don't talk about in any framework. I mean, this is far beyond logic. This is far beyond any kind of sanity. This is insane even to mention it. Because it's very clear that the right of return and the one state go hand to hand. Because finally it comes to the basic. And the basic is the basic question. Do we face two equal peoples with two equal rights? Or we face a privileged people and another people? And the right of return is endangering the whole project. Because all of a sudden we'll have to realize or to admit that we are not ready to go for equality, that there is a privileged people, that there is a chosen people, that Palestinians and Israelis are not exactly the same human beings. Because otherwise, how will we explain the fact that any one-third Jew or half Jew from Ethiopia can just take the first plane, land in Ben Gurion, and get the Israeli citizenship in the airport, while a Palestinian who was born or his family was born for decades and centuries can't even visit his family? How will we explain this if we will get to this dangerous path of equality? And the right of return had to be presented as the mother and father of all demons, because would we recognize this, we'll have to recognize equality. We'll have to recognize or realize that both peoples can bring anyone back to his homeland. In the Palestinian case, it's back to the homeland. In our case, it's to our, I don't know how to call it, new homeland. But in any case, it must be equal. So, in the last 1 or 2 years, I must say, there were first cracks in Israeli society. One state can be mentioned already. Don't misunderstand me. We are far, far, far away from any real discussion in Israeli society. Israeli society is living in total denial, and maybe we'll talk about it later, in total denial, in total blindness, moral blindness, totally disconnected with reality. I mean, I think if the Israeli society would have been an individual, it would really call for help. Because people who are so disconnected with reality might be dangerous, either to themselves or to their environment. And there are treatment. Not always it's hospitalization, but something must be done with those levels of denial, with those levels of living in an alternative reality which is totally disconnected with the real world, which is totally connected with what is happening half an hour away from our homes. So in the recent 1 or 2 years, people start to mention one state, and maybe the next step, it didn't happen yet, will be also mentioning the right of return, maybe in a limited way. But by the end of the day, and this will be my final sentence, by the end of the day, Don't misunderstand and don't be wrong. Israeli society doesn't deal with it. Israeli society has no interest, not in the occupation, not in the fate of the Palestinian people, not in equality, not in peace, obviously, which is off the table. Israeli society is now interested in totally different things, like the next vacation, the new car, career, money, nothing else but this, nothing else but this. And the best way to handle it is always to ask Israelis, what do you want? Where do you want to go? What do you want it to be in 10 years, in 20 years? And you will never get an answer, because there is no answer, because people don't discuss it. I remember still times when the joke was that 2 Israelis share 3 views, and today 3 Israelis hardly share 1 view. And this view will always be the nationalistic, racist, and many times also religious view. And the right of return is still something which is not only unacceptable, which is perceived and presented deliberately as life or death, as suicidal. The day that we will accept the return of 20 refugees will be the day of the end of the Jewish people.
Thank you. I think I wanted to pick up on Gideon's last comment about the fact that in the last 2 years there started to be a sense in which the one state is gaining ground, and of course this is happening also among Palestinians, although of course nobody can talk for the 10 millions of Palestinians' aspirations and visions. But there seems to be kind of a paradox whereby, on the one hand, the devices that Israel put into place, which are physical, legal, cultural devices to continue dispossessing the Palestinians of their land, of their water, of their food, of their culture, of their memory, of their history, is in a way counteracted by a solution, the one democratic state solution, that seems to be equally gaining terrain, almost as a result of this series of devices that want to prevent this from happening. And I guess for those among us, the Palestinians among us who see this as a possible way out, it is also something that calls into question the nationalist project, as you said, the nationalist project that is going to be an exclusionary project one way or the other. Whereas the one-state solution, in a way, brings into the picture the issue of rights for everyone, equal rights for all, rather than national claims or affiliations. So it will be a redefined political space that will focus on equal rights. And I think that the Palestinians in Israel, in a way, are already at the forefront of doing this, of unveiling the paradox of a state that, on the one hand, defines itself as a democracy, and you define it a very feeble democracy, and on the other is continues its settler colonial project of exclusion, of violation of international law, of discrimination of its citizens on the basis of ethnicity. So I'm just wondering, what do you have to say about the fact that, in a way, it is the Palestinians in Israel that are already embodying this vision of the one democratic state by their daily battles of making the state a really inclusionary one, which would mean, of course, changing its parameters, changing its skeleton, changing its political vision and constitution. So I would like to ask Ilan, who even have written a lot about this.
Yeah. I think you point to a very important kind of development, but I would kind of maybe look at it from a different perspective in a way. Israel has, since 1967, created a matrix of power by which it controls historical Palestine. And within that space, which used to be historical Palestine, it controls different Palestinian groups with different means. It is true that the Palestinian citizens of Israel, compared to any other Palestinian group, fare better than the rest of the groups, in a way. But they're still treated as aliens within their own homeland, despite the fact that they may have the right to vote, they may have the right to be elected. And for many years, especially for the labor government or labor movement that was the hegemonic power in Israel, and even for certain important groups within the center and the right, the idea of the two-state solution, the idea that there is a green line, that there is a kind of two geopolitical realities, one which is called Israel and the other one which is called something else, whatever it's being called, it was used in a way, first of all, to fragment the Palestinian people further. Secondly, to send a message that there are Palestinians who would fare better and Palestinians who would have lesser status. And to say that actually for themselves, especially as liberal Zionists, they found an ideal solution of how to have an ethnic state, a racist state, and yet to be considered a democracy. Because the small number of Palestinians are part of the citizenship because demographically they don't threaten the Jewish demographic majority. And there are so many mechanisms in place that do not allow them actually to take any significant role in the political life, that it doesn't matter if they are considered outside as being real citizens compared to the others. Now this was, I think, until the end of the last century. Until the end of the last century, you could have kind of built a model that would say that Israel wanted to build. Almost, I would call it the good Palestinians and the bad Palestinians. But since 2000, liberal Zionism disappeared. Most of the people in Israel who now hold power do not believe anymore in this ability to juggle the two balls together, that of racism and ethnicity and that of democracy or liberalism. And because of that, they themselves, and you're absolutely right, and that's the paradox, they themselves annulled, nullified the green line. They created one space. They imported methods they use in the occupation into Israel itself. So the reality where you had like at least two ways of being a Palestinian, if not three ways of being a Palestinian under Israeli control, is transforming. There is only one way of being a Palestinian within the Jewish state. And of course, it's worse to be in Gaza than to be in Haifa. But you are still treated in the same way. And the future, as far as the powers that be in Israel are considered, is the same future. And I think that helped to undermine the developments that happened on the Palestinian political scene as a result of the Israeli policy of fragmentation. If you divide the group a nation to 5 different groups, after 70 years, each group develops its own agenda. But if the powers start to create one space, one geopolitical space, the agenda, even if people wanted to create different agendas, let's say for Palestinians in the West Bank, or Palestinians in the West Bank, or the Palestinians in Israel, the reality does not allow you even to do that, even if whether it was a good idea or bad idea. In other words, what Gideon was talking about, the emergence of the one-state solution as a viable solution nowadays does not only come from people who conceptualize the reality in a different way and fought all their life against the two-state solution, or had a very strong moral conviction that the one state was the only right solution. It comes from the ground itself, from the reality on the ground. And the reality on the ground is that we all live in one state today. There's only one state. Israel controls the life of every Palestinian in different means, directly or indirectly. So the question is, what kind of a one state you want to have? I know that the two-state discourse is still alive among politicians, diplomats, and journalists, and academics, but this is really the last years of this discourse. there is a limit for how much a discourse or a conversation about a reality can be separated from the reality itself. It can last for a while. These kinds of dissonances can be maintained and sustained by certain academic, political, and economic forces. But there is a limit, and I can see this coming to an end very soon. So I think in this respect, you're right that there is a contradiction, but on the other hand, I actually understand the connection between the two, between the Israeli policies and the re-emergence. I just want to add one sentence, which I think is very important, and with this I would end. There is, it's not a false discourse on the one-state solution, but it is a discourse on the one-state solution of people who haven't thought it through to the end. And I'll explain what I mean. And you also alluded to it, as not alluded to it, you sort of posed the question, how does the one-state solution relate to the project of the liberation of Palestine from a national or even a nationalist perspective? Is there a contradiction between being a member of the Palestinian Liberation Organization that believes in the liberation of Palestine from a national perspective and the idea of a democratic state which is more right-centered or orientated towards granting rights? And I think that's where, I wouldn't call it the false one-staters, but this is the one-staters who haven't thought things to the end. Because you cannot really have a democratic one-state solution in Israel and Palestine without relating to the liberation of Palestine. It has to be a project of the liberation of Palestine as well. Now, I'm not saying it as a slogan. I'm not saying it as a slogan. This is a very practical, functional thing. I'll give one example. You cannot start a one-state solution by just granting civil rights, equal civil rights to everyone between the River Jordan and the Mediterranean, and hope that by this you started a new era in the life between the two communities, the settlers and the natives. No, you have to redistribute the resources. You have to rectify certain injustices, which can be, not every injustice can be rectified. People who are dead cannot be put back to life. But land that was robbed can be given back or can be compensated. It's a very painful process to build a reconciliation for a one-state solution that is also a liberation project. And if it will not be a liberation project, it will remain a topic for conversation in our living rooms, and it will not be a real political movement. That's the only way of making it a real political movement. And we have one bad example, which is South Africa. Because it was very clear that in South Africa, Mandela had to make a very important decision. You can have a one democratic state in South Africa if the white community is not going to pay any economic price for that transformation. And he agreed. He fully and knowingly and consciously signed an agreement which said the economic apartheid continues, the political apartheid is over. South Africa is in a much better position where it was. I'm not underestimating it, and I wish Israel and Palestine were there. I'm just saying that in a smaller country with a much smaller number of population, which is much more dense and kind of concentrated and focused in areas where people are so intensely intertwined in one another, one into the other, if this would not be a teaching process, an educating process for the settlers as well as for the natives, just declaring that everybody has equal rights would be a futile intellectual exercise.
I should never appear with Ilan because after he talks, what shall I say? First of all, I would like to mention the sense of humor of Israeli propaganda. The other day, I was participating in the Oxford Union debate last Thursday, And it was about the one state. The question was, is the two-state solution still attainable? And whom do I see in the other camp in front of me? The official spokesperson for the Israeli embassy. Israel is for the two-state solution. This was really surprising. I just asked him, where have you been in the last 50 years? Where have you been when it was illegitimate to mention the two-state solution? People went to jail for this. And what stopped you to go for it until now? I mean, what stopped you? So this must be mentioned, that finally this terrible, cheap, unprofessional propaganda has also a sense of humor. And I really appreciate it. I think that Israel is the only state in the world, I guess, who is having three regimes. Not one regime, but three regimes. And this continues your way of thinking, but now I'm talking from another point of view. In the front, there is this half-liberal democracy for its Jewish citizens, which has now more and more cracks, which is in danger in those days, real danger, but still operates like quite a reasonable liberal democracy. And they always give me as an example. I have total freedom to express my views, even though I needed a bodyguard for a while, but still it might be perceived as a democracy. And this is in the front. Then comes the second regime, which is a regime of discrimination toward the Israeli-Palestinian citizens who live within the 67 borders, who gain formally full civil rights. They can vote to the parliament, they can be elected to the parliament. They have obviously freedom of movement, Israeli passports, anything that on the formal basis should be perceived as equal rights. They are discriminated in any possible field, we'll not get into it, but it's really systematically the legal, the economical, the cultural, the educational, you name it. Anyone who has any doubts about it is just invited to come one day and to go to one of the towns or villages and say no more. I mean, it's enough to see in what conditions those towns are when there is a neighboring Jewish town, a much younger, and then you see it at once. It's enough to go to court, to Israeli court, and to see for the very same, and there were researches about it, for the very same crimes. What do you get if you are an Israeli Palestinian, and what do you get if you are a Jewish citizen? But still, regime number two, it is still not the worst. And then comes the third regime of Israel, of this very same Israel. And that's obviously the regime which looks like apartheid and walks like apartheid and talks like apartheid and is apartheid. Two people sharing one piece of land in the occupied territories. One people gain all the rights in the world. The other people has no rights whatsoever. I don't even understand how can people argue about the question, is it apartheid? I mean, just open your eyes. How can it be not apartheid? I mean, how can you call it if not apartheid? I once hosted a delegation of human rights activists from South Africa, and you know, I took them to a refugee camp of Balata, and by the end of the day I asked them, I was waiting to hear. And they say, no, there's nothing to compare. It is much worse than our apartheid. So in any case, worse or better, that's the third regime of Israel. And whenever we discuss Israel, and whenever Israel claims to be the only democracy in the Middle East, and the Western outpost in the Middle East, and the villa in the jungle, and all those beautiful, beautiful expressions, let's remember that, unfortunately, nobody can be half pregnant, even though it might be desirable from time to time, and nobody can be half democratic. And Israel is not a democracy because Israel has three regimes and not one. And there is no regime, there is no democracy which holds in its backyard one of the most cruel and brutal tyrannies on earth today. And I'm not exaggerating. The military occupation in the West Bank and the occupation of Gaza, which is in different ways, is today one of the most cruel, brutal, and criminal regimes on earth. Not less than this. Not less than this. So, getting back to your question, which is almost forgotten because Ilan took it far away. Ilan complained before we came here. He complained about people who ask questions which had nothing to do with the topic.
The answers are
Exactly. So, in any case, the Palestinian community, the Israeli-Palestinian community in Israel, is now really in a transformation phase. There are all kind of contradictory processes. On one hand, they become more Israeli in a way. They will read newspapers in Hebrew. They will watch Israeli TV. They will become more Israeli in the way they talk, they dress, the cars they buy, etc. In the same...
The Israelis are becoming more Palestinian, stealing our clothing.
I wish.
Our food.
Your food we stole a long time ago. I was brought up as a child, a little child. We had a song about falafel. You know, the Italians have spaghetti. The French, those are the lyrics. The Italians have spaghetti. The French are eating frogs. The Austrians have schnitzel, and we have falafel. This was the first occupation. But in any case, they are going through a very interesting process now. The young generation, the first generation was totally paralyzed. Second generation was also partly paralyzed by the trauma of the Nakba. And now we are facing, so on one hand, they are going more, I would say, an Israelization process. On the other hand, they are going to a Palestinization process. Their parents cared very little about the occupation, I must say here, frankly, very little about the occupation. They were concentrated in their own struggle, and there was very little solidarity. There was, but not as one would expect, with their brothers and sisters who live just 5 minutes away in many cases. But now there is a new generation which really one should follow very carefully because they might bring a lot of hope. They will not give up, and they will not let the Israelis do whatever they want, the Jewish Israelis do whatever they want with them. It is, like anything else, a long way to go, because racism and fears are so deep now. I live in a most liberal neighborhood in Tel Aviv and maybe in Israel, and even there you see all kind of phenomena of, I don't want delivery made by Arabs, I don't want Arabs to come to my home, really things that could happen only in Israel those days. And you know, there is also the incitement, and we can't ignore it. There is a systematic incitement now against the Israeli Palestinians by the government, above all by Netanyahu. Yeah, this will be my last remark. You know, racism is everywhere now in Europe, and extremists, right wings are everywhere. But there is no place today on earth that racism is so legitimate and so established like in Israel, where a prime minister and ministers and members of parliament can say things that no other place on earth they would be accepted as politically correct. Racism is today in Israel the new political correctness, and it's aimed also at the community of the Israeli Palestinians.
Thank you very much.
Yeah, I just wanted, because Gideon rightly said that I took off a bit from the main road.
A bit.
Because you mentioned something, Ruba, which I think maybe is what you also meant, that this kind of interaction for more than 70 years between two communities, even within the matrix of separation, segregation, and apartheid creates joint realities. I mean, even when you have ideology in a government that tries by force to separate people, to segregate people, and in Israel, the police, very much like in America in the case of African Americans and whites, the police is the main border between Jews and Palestinians in Israel itself, especially the border police. They are used to create like a living kind of boundaries by creating or trying to prevent any spaces where people can live together, talk together, work together, and dream together. And I think it is important to remember that in spite of everything we said, and I'm not trying to undermine everything we said, especially in the Galilee, and maybe that's the difference between Tel Aviv and the Galilee, because the Galilee, 50% of the population are Palestinians and 50% are Jews. Tel Aviv, as our dear friend Amnon Raska-Kotzkin says, is the only big Western metropolis without Muslims in it. The Galilee is binational. Is really binational in many ways. And it's interesting that in the Galilee, where the project of Judaization was the most kind of celebrated in Israel, namely how they created exclusive Jewish neighborhoods, towns, and settlements by law, despite the power of the state of Israel. Most of these supposedly, allegedly, exclusively Jewish spaces are binational. It's quite incredible. The most important town established in order to prevent Palestinians from growing is Upper Nazareth. They even they didn't have no shame in using the same name as the Palestinian town to say there's a Jewish Nazareth and there is a Palestinian Nazareth.
And which one is the upper?
And the upper one is, of course, the Jewish one, built on the land expropriated from the Palestinian one. 30 to 35% of the people in Upper Nazareth are Palestinians. And they went into it despite all the policies that were trying to prevent. And some of these new kind of realities develop in a bad way. I don't want to idealize it. Some of them develop in a beautiful way. And maybe by that what you meant, that there is there a model that tells us something about not only the impossibilities of living together, but also about the possibilities of living together. And I remember I did a piece for the London Review of Books on Upper Nazareth, so I called from a Palestinian friend of mine who lives in Upper Nazareth, I called the spokesperson for the municipality of Upper Nazareth, and I asked, can you please tell me how many Palestinians are living in your city? And she said, we don't have Palestinian citizens. And I said, that's very curious because I'm sitting in a house of a Palestinian who lives in Rachel Street 15 in your city. Is he not part of your city? I said, oh, so maybe we have one or two. And I said, but that's very strange because the whole street are Palestinian homes. He said, oh, we may have a street or two, and so on and so forth.
And then she called the police.
and this kind of denial on the one hand and the reality that they cannot transform is something that maybe should give us a little bit hope when we talk about the way Israel itself created the one-state solution, which in a way is much better than the false aspiration for a two-state solution that created these two spaces, the democratic Israel and whatever the Palestine state would be. Who cares? But that's the solution. So in a way, there are some grains of hope in otherwise a very, as Gideon described it so well, a very racist, apartheid kind of reality.
Thank you. This actually leads to my next question, but before I wanted to clarify that by pointing to the Palestinians, citizens of Israel, I didn't mean that they represent an ideal model of coexistence at all. I meant precisely the opposite, that they represent, that they are already challenging the framework, that they're already kind of trying to trying to build from within, eroding the constitutive fallacies of the state of Israel, of a state that claims to be a democracy, but is a democracy only for the Jewish population. And they're trying to build a space that is at the same time challenging the premise of that state and envisioning a project from within. So in that sense, I meant. But I'm very interested in what you both said, that in a way there is this kind of, I'm an anthropologist, so I'm always very interested in paradoxes and realities and trying to analyze what they mean politically. And I think that there seems to be one unintended effect of the occupation and the politics of dispossession. There is a politics that is a spacious side, as somebody has defined it, whereby you have, on the one hand, Israel that continues to build walls, separations, inventing new devices for implementing the apartheid system. And on the other hand, you have paradoxical outcome, perhaps, of this continuous implementation of separation, that Palestinians, because they are so shattered by these politics of spatial exclusion in the Galilee and in East Jerusalem in particular, there are hundreds of families who have reported to have moved into Israeli legal settlements like Pisgat Zev or the French Hill. And this is a very interesting phenomenon that may mean two things. Either that the Israeli apartheid system can be challenged, and this is, although the numbers are very small and compared to the grim situation of the millions of people, but symbolically, I would like to have your opinion on whether this is a symbol of a powerful challenge to a system that can invent as many devices of exclusion as it wants, but it will never really work completely, or is it a sign of normalization that, khalas, we have accepted that we will be citizens, second-class citizen in a stiff context that will never be challenged? And I wanted to have your opinion. Maybe Gideon can start.
Yeah.
Do we have a doctor in the audience? Because I found some signs of optimism with Ilan.
Which are worrying.
Which are worrying. I think you've not been to Israel recently, and it's good you're going there tomorrow, because you'll realize that even the little hope you spread here is based on nothing. I hate to say it, but I wish I could be optimistic. I wish I could think that those are signs of normalization. But the reality I'm facing in the Jewish society indicates exactly the opposite. Jewish society in Israel, the Jewish community in Israel is becoming in the recent years just more racist, more nationalistic, more extreme, many times also more orthodox and religious. The discourse is becoming, as I said before, much more racist. Atmosphere in the streets is much more violent than 5 years ago, 3 years ago. For me, the turning point, by the way, was the last war on Gaza, the last attack on Gaza, one should say, in which it was really all the boundaries were crossed in terms of violence against Israeli Palestinians, violence against demonstrators who dared to criticize the war, and violence toward the few journalists who dared to criticize the war. So this is not an atmosphere which creates any kind of normality or acceptance or opening a new chapter. By all means not. 2 days ago, a Israeli-Palestinian worker who worked in a supermarket in Tel Aviv was severely beaten in a brutal way by policemen only because they knew that he's not Jewish. He was a Bedouin from the Negev who lives and works for years in Tel Aviv. I mean, this should be the new normalization you're talking about. A guy from the Negev, from a Bedouin village, comes to Tel Aviv, is working in a Jewish supermarket, in a total Jewish community, and the police is coming and beating him really severely in a brutal way, only because they realize that he's not Jewish. They thought he's from the occupied territories, he doesn't have permission to be in Tel Aviv. It was pure racism. And that's the real atmosphere of Israel. We had today a leader, Haaretz had a leader today saying, and I was so happy to see those things in my newspaper, claiming that this beating of this Israeli citizen is the new face of Israel.
Well, Blake was worried that we won't have a debate between us, so we have. And I think the difference between a journalist and historian is that the journalist would never report joint life. This is not a news. He will report attacks. He will report racism. You will never report, I can see a headline in Haaretz, the last year Israelis and Palestinians in the Galilee, in Carmiel, shared together a kindergarten, a new workshop, and so on. This is not news for you, and rightly so. And rightly so. So optimism and pessimism has to do with our professions as well.
No, now you really sound like the worst nationalist and right-winger
Okay.
who claims that the media is telling us only the bad things and never tells us
I didn't mean
everything
it that
positive.
way. No, I meant that the nature of of course I agree with the characterization of the Israeli society, but there is counter reality. There is counter culture, so to speak. It is small, it is feeble, it is precarious, it is very limited in scope, but if it really did not exist, it would have been terrible. Because this would have meant that the only way of creating a one state was by demolishing the Jewish existence in Palestine. That's what it means. If you really think that the Israelis are beyond any change, if we would have believed in South Africa that the only way of creating a post-apartheid South Africa was by eliminating the whites, this would have never worked. So we have still to believe, and there are proofs for this, that there is a basis for reframing the relationship between the settlers who are now in the third generation and the indigenous people. Because most of the settler colonialist projects ended in the elimination of the settlers. One project in South Africa did not end in the elimination of the indigenous people, but the indigenous people actually, at least in political terms, reframed the relationship with the settlers. And I think this is a painful process, and by that I didn't mean that you don't report good things. I think that the press cannot report incremental processes. You can't do it. It's not interesting for you. It's something that is built by baby steps, 1 week after a week. Which reporter would sit 1 year? Anthropologists would. But a reporter will not sit a year in a group that I belong to, a community of Palestinians and Jews in the Galilee who are trying to build an alternative. Now, the second thing I want to say about your question is I don't think it's defeatism. I think you sort of looked at, you asked, you didn't say it was, and maybe it's kind of...
I asked your opinion.
Yeah, I know.
Is it challenging?
No, I think it is. I think
the power structures of apartheid, or is it normalizing it?
Exactly. No, I think it is neither. It is neither. I tell you exactly what I think it is. It is something which is global. It's nothing to do with Palestine and Israel, first of all. Since 2008, there is total disbelief in the power of ideologies and politics from above to change our life. We have seen it in Britain. We have seen it in the United States now. We can see it in Europe. We can see it elsewhere. Sometimes, unfortunately, it is translated in voting for extreme right parties. Sometimes it is translated by voting for extreme left parties. But it means there is little belief that the citizen can have an impact on the big politics from above, and there is no need to be part of that. So what comes instead? It's the local ability, your ability locally and in a very limited way to change your life despite the fact that in the horizon there isn't a big change waiting for you. And I can see it among refugees in Lebanon. I can see it among Palestinians in the Nakab. I can see it among Palestinians in the West Bank. I can see it among Palestinians in Haifa. There is the idea that says maybe before we wait for the big bang, the big change, the one big revolution, the one big liberation, I have children, I have grandchildren, I'm a proud Palestinian. What are my options? Are my options is to wait what? As an Israeli citizen, to vote once in 4 years? As a member, as a person under the PA, not to even vote? Or maybe in the Gaza Strip to send a message to the Hamas what I want them to do? My options are so limited politically. What can I do? And I think what we see are the local projects, of liberation. And they are so varied in their manifestation that the powers that be have no way of checking them. It can be food, it can be dress, it can be education, it can be the internet. It can be so many ways in which you make your life more meaningful. And by this you say to yourself, it doesn't matter whether I'm a citizen of Israel or not. I am making my life in Palestine as a Palestinian within what I can do. And I think this is very impressive because I do believe that these atomized, localized, you can note I'm in a very optimistic mood today. These localized, atomized kind of projects can eventually become much more powerful from below. Of course, it wouldn't work without pressuring Israel, without the boycott and divestment, without exposing Israel as a pariah state, without throwing Israel from the United Nations. All these things would have to happen as well, I'm not saying. But these are the kind of destructive things you have to do in a way to change the reality. But you want to live in that place afterwards, both as a Jew and as a Palestinian. How can you live there together afterwards if all you're thinking of is military defeat or even economic destruction? This is not working. This is not going to work. You are not going to do anything effective if you're not connecting it not just with the elimination of the elimination, if you want, but by constructing some sort of a model for the future. And I think these models are developed locally because no national leadership of the Palestinians would dare to develop them collectively. Neither would, of course, the Israelis. I think the people are taking their future in their hands locally. And that's why you don't see it politically yet. But I believe that it will become political.
Thank you. I have one last question for each, and then we'll open up the debate to the very patient audience here. I'm very interested to what to listen to what you're saying because I mean, as a Palestinian, of course, it's very hard for me to accept that someone is telling me that all the resistance that has been taking place for the past 8 years didn't do anything, didn't have any effect. And I'm wondering whether this does kind of any justice. Yes, we have a leadership that is completely failing to pursue other project of self-determination, whether it's in 1, 2 parallel states, but still there are every day thousands of resistance initiatives, from the hunger strikes to the local, to the international solidarity movements, to the local struggles for the demolition of the wall, and the list can continue. But my question is really to Gideon now. You mentioned in an interview something that really touched me, and you said that you perceive your role as one which is to prevent a situation where Israelis will be able to once to say in the future, we didn't know. So my question to you is, are you failing your mission?
I'm a total failure. What do you mean? No, seriously, in terms of this question, everything goes against the direction that I was trying to shape. Israelis know very little about the occupation, do not want to know anything about the occupation. Brainwash system is doing so well in Israel, with the biggest collaborator, and this is the Israeli media, which is a free media, by the way, and nobody forces it to behave as it is, but only out of commercial considerations. They perceive their role as pleasing the audience and pleasing the viewers. And we have in Israel this rare coalition, wall-to-wall almost, of government, army, secret services, publishers, editors, writers, and readers. All of them don't want to know and don't want to inform. And it's very hard to fight this coalition because it's almost everyone. Readers don't want to read about the occupation, and journalists don't want to bother them, especially not between 2 and 4, because those are the times they're resting, and Israel is resting most of the time, morally. And one voice or one newspaper, because it's not me alone, it's really my newspaper, who not only gives me the platform, but is also part of this struggle. One voice or one media, or one medium or one newspaper cannot make the difference. And I think I totally failed in terms of changing anything. It's maybe too early to judge. The historian will say that we see only for the present and we don't see the future. Maybe one day, maybe there is a process of going on. Maybe we did succeed in a way to raise some questions, to, spread some seeds. I must say, I'm still invited to Israeli talk shows on TV. I'm invited to, I'm interviewed here and there. It's not like I'm totally banned. But, there were those old circuses that always show this man with 2 heads or this clown with 3 legs. So they bring me also as something really of this kind, exotic, yeah. And they make them feel very just because here we are. I must say, speaking about sense of humor, that most of the Israelis are sure that the Israeli media is a leftist media, and it's the only place where people would laugh at this. In Israel, they wouldn't laugh at it at all. They truly believe that there is a leftist mafia which runs the media. The government says so. Most of the Israelis are deeply convinced that the Israeli media is almost a traitor because, they really are calling to put an end to the occupation and struggling against the occupation, covering the occupation, rehumanizing the Palestinian. None of this is true. It's another way to manipulate the media, like they do, by the way, in many ways also in your own country. BBC is like Hamas. Yeah. I stopped watching BBC in the recent years, as Zionistic as it became, or more Zionistic. I don't want to be unfair. BBC still has a lot of dignity. But still, to call BBC as a pro-Palestinian and anti-Israeli service, and that's the way it's perceived in Israel. The entire international media is perceived as, neo-Nazis in terms of Israel. And that's a very cynical way to manipulate, and it's working. I know it's working with the Western media, it's working in Israel. You threaten, you touch the right emotional buttons, you hint about the past, and you get paralyzed journalists and paralyzed editors. I know it from even countries like Sweden, which is maybe the most progressive country in terms of the Palestinian cause. And still it's very hard, even in Sweden, to raise a critical voice against Israel, because there are those lobbies who will always find a way to claim anti-Semitism, and you know it from your own country, to scream that any anti-Israeli critic is anti-Semitism, not to say Nazism. So, getting back to your question, it's not for me to judge, and maybe it's not now the time to judge if I succeeded, if my newspaper succeeded or failed. I know very clearly that if, God forbid, one day Haaretz will disappear, Israel will be a different state, will be a different society, will be a worse society, and as much as it is hard to believe, it might become even worse. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I have just one last question for Ilan on a different note, and then, of course, we'll open it up. I just wanted to ask about the boycott and divestment campaign, which is a very important nonviolent tool of resistance that has been espoused by thousands of people. Every day the list of people who back the boycott and divestment campaign grows longer. Yesterday, even Ken Loach, after he was given the award at the Cannes, the first thing he said to newspapers was that he is for the cultural boycott of Israel. At the same time, concomitantly, we see that the spaces for critical debates and of academic freedom, as academics I'm speaking now, are shrinking. So you have a simultaneous process of a campaign that is getting more and more support from small churches, trade unions, academic associations, students' bodies everywhere in the world supporting and voting for the BDS campaign. And this, at the same time and simultaneously, spaces for critical debates are shrinking, censorship is growing, academic freedom is at risk, and political freedom is at risk. We have just seen an example of that a couple of weeks ago with the elections here in this country. So my question to you is, what do you think about the campaign? Is it successful? Is it bringing with itself new forms of power oppression?
I think you two can have great time together depressing yourselves. And you can take Chaim Bereshit with you together, the three of you. Keep depressing yourself, things are not moving, things are not changing, Israel is beyond repair, and so on. I'm sorry, I'm not in this game.
No, I'm offering you a possibility
Okay, I'm not in
to
this
say
game.
that things are going really well. Because if I
saying,
say that things are going really well, then, you know...
I'm not saying that things are going well. I'm an activist, and an activist should never ask himself the question, did you fail? This is not a relevant question for an activist. An activist who doesn't have a government, who doesn't have a foreign office, who doesn't have universities, doesn't have an army, does not ask himself, did you fail? How can you ask such a question of one person vis-a-vis the establishment? What you ask yourself is a different question. Did you do enough today with others to change it? You can't ask yourself whether the situation is worse and are you responsible for that. In a more serious tone, I think my analysis, although I accept exactly the way you, Ruba, you portrayed it, and I agree, and I know we agree on this, I actually see it as a big success. Really, I really see it as a big success. The worst thing that could have happened to the BDS movement was that we would have sat here and we would have known the following facts. Nobody in the government of Britain cares about the BDS movement. The Prime Minister of Israel would not have mentioned the BDS even once. Israel would not have created a special task force that includes senior people from the Mossad and the Secret Service who also want now to target personally all the BDS activists. That would be horrible. That would be horrible. If America would not demand from Europe in the free trade agreement to include a clause that demands that BDS would not be part of any agreement with American companies, that would have been awful. Then I would have joined all of you depressed, self-depressing people. I would be with you. But these things show you these powerful multinationals, the powerful government of America, the President of the United Nations, the Prime Ministers of Israel, devote millions, and this is a fact, devote millions of dollars to fight few very committed, naive activists. It's unbelievable. It's unbelievable. I remember that I began to understand the power of the BDS when it was still a non-event. When it was that was my last. I'm banned from Israeli media. But my last interview in Israeli media was, they asked me, how was your trip to the United Nations? Because they heard the Secretary General of the United Nations supporting the idea of the BDS. And I said, there is not yet a movement. What are you talking about? But they already realized the potential in it. Now, people are rightly worried that if you talk only about the BDS and about liberation from below, that's one criticism. Then you substitute the need to liberate with boycott. But this is not the relationship between liberation and boycott. It's a very clear strategy that can only be, in fact, if you want at all to evaluate its success, it's exactly when the reaction against it is powerful. That's the only test for its success. Because otherwise, why should they bother? Why should they worry about it? And by the way, they should be worried about it. They should be worried about it. Because we know from the case of South Africa, it took 21 years from the first act of BDS against South Africa to become a serious political factor in changing the reality. Now, I just want to end by saying that this does not mean that this is not going to be a very tough struggle. Yes, the struggle to liberate Palestine is harsh, is tough. Struggling against the anti-BDS is not like struggling against Israeli occupation. It's not like struggling against the Israeli strangulation of life in Gaza. It's not even compared to what we, and especially the Palestinian citizens in Israel, are suffering from. Really, people are not being killed and not wounded in the battle for the BDS. So even some labor leaders should be a bit more manly or more courageous in the way, next to feminists, they should be a bit more courageous and not cower and claim political pragmatism and play the stupid game of anti-Semitism. But this is the struggle. Finally, we have the struggle. We have finally the struggle. And I think in this respect, every evidence of a counter-BDS action is a testimony for its success, but it's also a huge challenge. I'm not underestimating. It's a huge challenge. The moment the Israeli parliament, I'll give you an example. The moment the Israeli government, which I'm waiting for this moment, really, would tell the Palestinians you are not allowed to be represented in the Israeli Knesset, would mean that the Palestinian community in Israel really got its act together. That would be the moment of success. As long as everybody plays this game, we should be represented in the Knesset, we might do something, Israel is winning. And the moment the PA would be replaced by a more authentic representation, it means that something is moving. So the only area where things are really getting to the powers that be, that have the power to change things, so far is the field of the BDS. But it can happen elsewhere as well. That's the good news.
Let me just spoil this party. I
Depress us.
totally agree with you. I just wrote 2 weeks ago an article, excuse me for quoting myself, under the title Only BDS, because I really think that's the most promising thing. This is the most, maybe the only promising thing in town. But I want to suggest an additional explanation which does not contradict yours. But, you know, before we getting here really happy and satisfied, let's remember also this. The alternative explanation is that the Israeli government and Israeli society is reacting like this to the BDS because something terrible happened to Israel in recent years. And this something terrible is the fact that the danger of the Iranian bomb is no more a danger. And this is a catastrophe in Israeli terms. It's catastrophic for domestic politics. it's catastrophic for its international policy. Because what will we say now? How will we alert the world? How will we get the people united? How will we continue with our policy if there is no demon standing on the borders of Israel and trying to exterminate the Jewish people? So they sat and thought and thought, you know, Egypt is not really in the game, Syria is lost. Hezbollah, you know, you can't put it all on an organization which is now deeply involved in Syria. They thought, oh, BDS. Let's invent the new demon. BDS. Let's go for it. We'll fight it. We'll unite the world against it. We'll unite the Jewish communities all over the world against it. And we will unite the people of Israel. We will show them that there is a new enemy on the border and we have to do anything possible to fight against it. They made a mistake, obviously, because their reaction is the best boost, is the best encouragement and recognition of BDS as an effective tool, no doubt. But remember that at least partly it comes from Israeli total different consideration. Because I think by the end of the day, the economical warfare of BDS until now is very limited. Israelis don't pay for it yet. What is really getting stronger and stronger, mainly, not mainly, but partially also thanks to Israeli government, is the psychological effect, which I don't underestimate, by all means not. And this can increase now, and I totally agree. It is, for me, the only hope for a change.
Thank you very much. So we'll open up the, I think all the hands basically are up. So I don't know where to start. First of all, there should be someone with a microphone, is there?
Yes.
So I guess we'll start from, I don't know where she's going.
She's going away. She's going home. She finished.
So do you want to start from the first row here in the left-hand side? Yeah. Maybe if you can keep it a little bit brief, the question, and clear, and
It
is a brief.
so that
It's always
because there are so many.
I want to address.
Yes.
I want to address both of you, but first I want to salute Gideon for the courage of your conviction. I believe that if every Israeli has one atom of your courage, maybe we will be closer to the ODS. I share Ilan's optimism because I believe revolutions start from the grassroots, from the bottom. I share Gideon's pessimism because we see it every day. We get angry. And this dark cloud that he talks about is epitomized by the extreme policies that Israel is following now. Ruba said, maybe one day we will say, oh, we shouldn't say we didn't know. The Western powers, when they see the reality and the face of Israel as it is moving to the extreme right, maybe they should stand up and say, well, we should really know. My question now to both of you is, with the BDS and the ODS, hopefully the BDS will become ODS soon, with that moving so fast and so powerful, where does the external powers come into the equation? Because they must have a say. They are the ones who are supporting this apartheid regime, like in South Africa.
Mm-hmm.
Do you prefer to collect a few or answer?
What do you think?
Maybe we collect two or
Okay.
three. Okay, so maybe we collect a few and then. So there is one.
Could I ask why Abbas and the PA are so compliant with the occupying power?
There is one at the front here, and another one just behind them.
Thank you. Jonathan Fryer, Chair of the Liberal Democrat Friends of Palestine. I was intrigued that in your absolutely fascinating interchange of ideas and views, neither of you mentioned something that's been high in the media here in Britain and indeed on social media. In other words, the appointment of Avigdor Lieberman as Defence Minister. Now, the pessimist might say that just shows everything's getting worse. Could the optimist, maybe Ilan, you're the more optimistic of the two, see that maybe because Lieberman is so awful and says such despicable things, that this actually might turn the mood, certainly abroad, against the Israeli government?
Okay.
So they would like to answer.
It's a bit too much. Antoine, you see, the kind of thing that you're talking about, which is really a fundamental change in the policies of governments, if you want the movement from boycott to sanctions. Again, I can only look at historical examples, and I'm very deeply convinced that these do not happen just like that, in one day. That you sort of get up in the morning and you say the external, as you call them, the external powers. I mean, I think you meant the Western governments mainly, have changed their policy, or the American president did a U-turn. It's really a discussion and a very valid debate, not about the big fundamental changes, but about the small changes, the incremental changes. How do we understand them? I'll give you an example. I met just very shortly Bernie Sanders. And the one thing he said that really kept me on my toes was it was such a difficult thing to decide not to go and talk in front of AIPAC, to decline an invitation from AIPAC. And Gideon reminded me, true, it was equally difficult for him not to sign the senator's letter asking for the United States to triple its military aid to Israel. And then he said, I declined the invitation to AIPAC, and the sky didn't fall. Everybody told me, this is it. This is the end. I have no chance. Nothing is going to happen. I'm destroyed politically. In fact, we talked about it, I found that my percentage among the Democratic voters increased because I declined to go to AIPAC. And he is going to put Palestine, and Gideon knows it, he's going to put Palestine in a far more central position, also because he's a shrewd politician, because he thinks that Hillary's unequivocal support for Israel is a weak thing. And he thinks he's going to attack her on this in the Democratic convention. Now, there are two ways of dealing with it. You can say, Ilan, come on, the man has walked a quarter of a mile. He should have walked 3 miles. He's not a member of the ODS. He doesn't support the BDS. He doesn't dress like a Palestinian. He doesn't wear Palestinian colors. And to say, I'm sorry, we're still very depressed. No, I don't see it like this. I think that this is an important crack in the wall. And eventually, even the strongest wall with enough cracks falls down. So that's what I think. I don't think we should wait for the big EU declaration, the big American U-turn, and so on. There is an evil situation on the ground that affects the realities in the Middle East elsewhere. It will take time. It won't be easy, and there will be a lot of suffering, unfortunately. I don't at all underestimate the horrific things that await us in the near future. But to say that the trends show no signs of change is unacceptable to me. I think I'll leave you the question of Abbas. I wanted to have constructive amnesia on this one. I think really it's a Palestinian issue. I don't like to talk about it too much. I think that the Palestinian strategy vis-a-vis the settler colonialist project of Zionism has tried different avenues. They tried full resistance. They tried the diplomatic process. The same person who led the resistance, Arafat, was trying the diplomatic process. None of this has worked. Palestine is not decolonized. Palestine is not liberated. The apartheid state of Israel is still there and controls everything. I think that, by the way, not only the PA, if I may be honest, as a friend and as someone who was born in Palestine who wants still to live there, I don't think the Fatah or the Hamas are the relevant forces of the future anyway. I think we are in a period of transition which will see a very different kind of definition of what is the liberation of Palestine. There will be a different way of deciding who are the leaders, who are the authentic representation. For the time being, we have the structures that we have. And we have to convince them about BDS and ODS. We don't need to work against them. We have to convince them that these are the right strategies. But they are transitional. The reality is such that old political structures just don't fit this reality. So it's not going to work. Thank God someone is writing there about Lieberman. You see, probably we didn't mention it because I think we quite agree that basically nothing dramatically has changed in Israel. It's the same ideology, it's the same strategy, it's the same guidelines of the previous Minister of Defense as it would be of the next Minister of Defense. However, there are always innuendos and there are always tactical changes. Tactically, it will be probably worse. I mean, his methods of dealing with the West Bank, with the Palestinians in Israel, are frightening. At least those he declared, his declared methods. But to be honest, he cannot change anything fundamentally, neither does he want to change anything fundamental. You have to understand one thing about the present political and strategic elite of Israel, which I think people fail to understand. The status quo for most Israeli politicians and strategists is the vision, is the reality. You have to protect and maintain. There's no need to change the status quo. The status quo is the best thing we have, and we have to protect it. Lieberman basically accepts this idea. He thinks that there can be some changes, and whenever he thinks of changes, this is terrifying. But I think to portray this appointment as something very dramatic is wrong. Your question said, does this kind of bring us to pessimism or optimism? I agree. I agree with the tone of the question. You can say the more Israel exposes its real nature, maybe it is for the better, rather than the wishy-washy kind of picture that the liberal Zionists were trying to portray and undermine the efforts of pressure on Israel. So in this respect, yes, it exposes even further the DNA of the settler colonialist state of Israel. But I think even without, who needed the appointment of Lieberman in this room to know something? Did you learn something new about Israel because Lieberman became the Minister of Defense? I think we knew what we needed to know. We know enough as it is. Thank you.
I try to be brief. I think I got another explanation for the slight differences between us, except of question of mentality and psychological.
You mean mental health?
Mental health, exactly. Look, Ilan, in the last 35 years, I am trying to cover the Israeli occupation and the Israeli crimes on at least weekly basis. There's not one single week in which I don't go either to Gaza until I was prevented of going to Gaza or to the West Bank, with meeting really only with victims. Only with victims from all kinds. You know it. I think when you face those victims week after week for so many years, it's very hard to talk about processes. When you face that those victims repeat themselves, but systematically, You know, the methods are here and there different, but basically it's more of the same week after week. And I'm speaking now about micro, a total micro picture in the smallest resolution, one family, one prisoner, one injured, one handicapped, or one killed, or one deported. And to tell them, listen, it's historical processes until Israel will fit itself to the new reality, until the Western governments will understand, until this will happen and this will happen. I am too impatient, because I think those people deserve in their lifetime some change. Not that I know how to do it, but for me, historical processes are not a hope, not a source of hope, and not any kind of relief, because by the end of the day, I look at those people whom I meet every week. In the same time, I see also what is happening to the Israeli society. And also toward this, I don't have too much patience and too much understanding and too much time to absorb it, to maintain it, to contain it, to believe that the change will be. So maybe that's, and then when you speak about those processes. About Abbas, I think we agree. About Lieberman, I would like just to say so. When he was nominated, I mean, when they published it, that they nominated, they called me from my newspaper and asked me to write, you know, an immediate commentator for the next day. And my first reaction was, let's praise it. Because I always believe that it's better to have this kind of people rather than the Shimon Pereses who, you know, bluff Israel and bluff the whole world. And at the end of the day, they are doing the same. And I really thought to write very good. Another mask in this masquerade was torn. We'll have defense minister who would really like to deport, kill, injure, you name it, depress the Palestinians as much as possible. But again, the second thought was, and what will be about the victims? Because he will do some change. First of all, his rhetorics. To nominate him is really to show the world that Israel couldn't care less anymore about what the world thinks. Really. I think the main responsible for this, believe it or not, is Barack Obama. Barack Obama taught Israel that Israel can do whatever she wants. He will keep on flattering Israel. Even if they humiliate him on a personal basis, like no other politician in the world would dare. David Cameron would never dare to do what Netanyahu did to Obama, and still Obama will flatter Israel. This was a very destructive lesson for Israel, because Israel used to be much more aware and scared from the international community. This is gone now. Nothing. And therefore, the nomination of Lieberman is a message. I don't want to use dirty words, but fuck you, the world. We will do whatever we want. Anyhow, you don't do anything about it. It's also a message toward the Arab world and the Palestinians, including the Egyptian president. Think about him, what you may think about him, who tried to be involved in bringing someone else to the government. And it was really a slap in his face when they nominated Lieberman. And again, showing them, we will do whatever we want. To believe that the nomination of Lieberman will create a reaction of the world which might be positive for our purposes, excuse me, Lieberman was already foreign minister. And the world accepted him, and they all ran to him, and almost nobody that I know had boycotted him. They all ran to talk to him, and they all came back. I met some foreign ministers or diplomats who met him. Listen, when you sit with him, tete-a-tete, he's more serious, he's more responsible, he's not so extreme. We have to give him a chance. He's a very serious man. Really, we have gone through all this. Lieberman is a really brutal bully, and his nomination is a brutal step. which I can't see anything good coming out of it, except of harder steps toward the Palestinians, and this brings me back. I think that the only thing, he will not go for big wars, I think so, but he will tyrannize the Palestinian much more, not because he believes in it. This man doesn't believe in anything. He is the most cynical politician that you can imagine yourself, because he knows that in Israel of 2016, the more brutal you are toward the Palestinian, the more popular you are in Israel, that's all. And so, yes, as the large picture, it's not a strategic change. No way, sure not. But you know, even for the daily life of the Palestinians, their life will be much harder, and the message is a very, very brutal message of Israel.
Thank you. I think we should keep, there are so many questions, so maybe you should keep the answers a little bit shorter if you want to have more questions. I'm not nice. Also, I wanted to just say very briefly that Palestinians are just not only victims. I mean, they have been teaching resistance for the past 70 years. They have been doing and inventing all kinds of creative practices, violent practices, non-violent practices of resistance. And I think that the project of liberation should be talked about not just in terms of liberating the Palestinians from the Israeli occupation, but of liberating Israelis from their own moral and political decadence. And so I think that's very important, because I don't want the message to be that Palestinians are just sitting there and needing to be kind of rescued by us sitting here. But I mean, with all my incredible, really deep respect for you as persons and for your political work. But I think it's very important here to say this, because foreign Israelis would really learn a very good lessons on how to resist their own racist and violent practices within their own societies if they knew closely what goes on in the West Bank and the Gaza Strip on a daily basis. I just want to give the floor to, again, maybe 2-3 questions from this side, and then there are so many on this part. So can you really be very brief, because we have less than 20 minutes perhaps to...
Could I just say something? My name's Jenny Tong. I'm a member of the House of Lords. I want to share something with you that might actually cheer Gideon up. I've been at the UN Humanitarian Conference, a very, very big event in Istanbul, thousands and thousands of people at the side events. And one of the side events, I was speaking at a Palestinian one, obviously, but one of the side events in the main concourse with a big room was Israel humanitarian efforts. The government of Israel, which I thought was very impressive. And my colleagues, mainly Palestinians, said, oh, no, I'm going to go to that. We'll boycott that, BDS and all that. I said, no, I want to go in and have a look. Well, the thing to cheer you up, Gideon, first of all, is that 10 people turned up out of about 10,000. And the other thing is, I must tell you that in the course of the lecture, there was a guy from Search and Rescue who told us how wonderfully they'd worked in Nepal. They were first there after the earthquake. Wonderful things they'd done in Haiti, and which is absolutely true. They did so. And this great, great humanitarian work that Israel does all over the world where there is a disaster. This was followed by a minister from the Department for International Development in Israel who said Israel loves doing development work because they understand developing countries, because when the State of Israel was formed, there was nothing but sand dunes, and they had to work from that. So just, and I'm nearly finished, I had to just say and ask very politely, sort of little granny, not quite understanding sort of voice, that what sort of work had they managed to do after the demolition of houses and villages in the West Bank, and also after the offences on Gaza. And could I finally tell the minister that when I was at school, I did a lot of history and geography, and I learned that there were a lot of towns and villages and cities and a very thriving agricultural industry in Palestine before the State of Israel was formed.
Thank you.
And maybe he should consult his text.
Thank you very much. There is a question, I think, a woman that has been, no, I think she's been raising her hand for a long time, and then I think we should move to this side of the room, otherwise we'll be accused of being, and the middle. We'll be accused to leaning to the left, which is...
A couple of weeks ago, in Ramallah,
But very short, please.
a couple of
otherwise
weeks
there's
ago
no-
in Ramallah, a brand new Palestinian museum was opened, paid for by very wealthy Palestinians from the diaspora. Is this a hopeful thing, or is it something that's always been happening, and how helpful is the diaspora?
Okay.
oh my God. So there is a question here, and then we'll take another two, and then we'll move to this part, and then you'll answer.
Thanks.
Okay.
First, I wanted to remind people, because as an Israeli I do remember this, that the one-state solution was actually a Palestinian solution and was suggested in 1947, and until 1988 the PLO did not change that position. It had a one democratic secular state solution. So that's just for historical sake. I want to ask both of you about what Ruba has just said, because I also feel that what we need to do is to have democracy for Israelis. There is no democracy at the moment. And obviously for Palestinians, there's no question about that. Now, in my judgment, it cannot happen on the basis of the very important things that Ilan was describing in the Galilee. This is obviously, not that you meant that this is enough. So in my judgment, everything has to change so that there will be democracy. From the army, the education system, all the ministries, all the Zionist legislation, everything in Israel currently has to go. Zionism has to go. Otherwise, we will never have democracy, and we'll have a worse result than in South Africa. The JNF, the Jewish Agency, every single authority, every single institution is Zionist. It all has to change. I want to know what you think about that.
Sorry
Okay,
to
no,
interrupt.
it's
Thank you
good
very much.
question.
There is a question here at the front, and then we go...
No, it's fine.
No problem. Maybe I should take too long.
Okay,
Thank you,
right.
gentlemen, and thank you, Mr. Levy, for bringing some humor into the mix. Because from a manic, depressive Palestinian, I know Ilan very well. I can tell you that I haven't heard anything to make me an optimist. And Ilan, as you know, I write as well, and I've written about exactly what you said about Mr. Lieberman and the F word. Where is the optimism? You brought another thing to the mix tonight, Ilan, which is tokenism. That we have a couple of families who live in a kibbutz in Israel or in a new settlement, or you have in Galilee some friends who invite you to dinner, or somebody which I've been to in Upper Nazareth who live in the street. Unless and until the Jews, and I'm going to use the word Jews, not Israelis, until and unless the Jews come to realize that a crime has been committed and still being committed in their names, nothing will change. Thank you.
There is one there in the back. This one.
This is a question for Gideon. Oh, hello. This is a question for Gideon. I'm sure you've had dinner or lunch in many stolen houses in Israel. Has anyone catalogued or mapped how many there are and what their value is? I realize that a lot of families still have the keys and the locks have obviously been changed. But if there was a return, what would happen to all these houses? And how many billions are they all worth?
There's one here. Or maybe you can collect one there in the back so you can then come back this side. Is it okay?
Thank you to the entire panel. I'm not sure if you guys are aware, but about 35 of us, when we were trying to come in today, were not able to get in.
We know.
Because the security at the reception got some kind of mysterious call, and the prevent legislation might have been invoked. We have insufficient information about this, but that might have been the case. I'm wondering if you can touch on this issue briefly.
Mm-hmm.
And Gideon, I just want to tell you, you don't have to worry about being eclipsed by Ilan, even though we love Ilan very, very much. You gave a fantastic speech at the Oxford Union debate last week, which we attended, and I encourage absolutely everybody to check it out on the Oxford Union's YouTube channel. Thank you.
Thank you. Well done. It's not about you.
Sorry, I was having some good news that we can go on a little bit farther, so perhaps we can, at this point, give the opportunity to the speakers to answer the questions, because we can go on for a bit longer than 9. So
9 in the morning?
yes, but not tomorrow, the day after.
Let me start.
Yeah, by all means.
Because I really am tempted to answer about the Palestinian Museum before you will say that that's a great hope in the horizon. I can tell you that this, I tend to know that this Palestinian Museum is totally empty. There's nothing in it. And maybe it is a symbol for, yet, absolutely, yet, and I would love to see it full and crowded and presenting Palestinian history and art and culture, but right now the building stands totally empty and nobody knows when will it happen. And obviously it's very good news when museums are being opened and built up, but I had to say it before Ilan will take it as an opportunity again to spread here his lies and illusions.
They don't know Israeli humor. They think that they really think it.
I really mean it.
Okay.
To Chaim Bereshit, which I'm really privileged to meet you finally in face. We never met, I think, and I know and I read what you write. Yes, I tend to agree to what you say. Everything, I mean, it must be really reshuffled. Otherwise, it will not be a just solution. How to get there, I really don't know. But I totally agree. There will be no. I mean, partial steps will mean nothing, including the two-state solution, which is a partial step, and it will lead to, like the Oslo Accords. It will be a big celebration with some Peace Nobel Prizes, and we'll be back on track. The question is how to do it, and this we really have to go very, very far, and the question is how to start it. I think that the start point must be to change the discourse in the world, and maybe one day also in Israel, and to start to speak only about equal rights. To stop speaking about the occupation, about the settlements, to start to speak about equal rights, because against equal rights, Israel has very little to say. Against equal rights, you can't say security. You hardly can say Holocaust. You can finally either say yes to equal rights or no, and to admit that this no is the final recognition to the fact that Israel is a racist country, de jure, not only de facto, because saying no to equal rights means that there is one privileged people and there is one depressed people. So I think that by the end of the day, it's all about a beginning of a process in which Israelis will start, and it's a long way to go, it will start to perceive the Palestinians as equal human beings. This is the core of everything. Almost no Israeli today really perceives the Palestinians as equal human beings. Almost no left ones, right-wingers. If you scratch a little bit under the skin, it's very easy to realize that there is very deep, deep racism lying there based on biblical victimizations and all kind of incitements. We will not get into it now, but it should all start with this, really to reshuffle the perceptions before we reshuffle the institutions, and really to start to speak in equal terms about equal rights. Same about recognition of the crimes that you mentioned. Yes, I think that the way to any kind of opening a new chapter must go through a recognition and taking accountability for the crimes, which is not the case, far from being the case in Israel, because it's hardly possible to speak about the crimes, to mention the crimes. The Nakba is something, mentioning the Nakba is something illegitimate. And this denial must change one day. But I'll take your role, and I can tell you that the more Israel is denying the crimes, the more I know that they at least recognize that something is burning under their feet. Because would they really be so confident about their justice, they wouldn't care to speak about the Nakba, they wouldn't care so much to mention the past, they wouldn't cover it up with the trees, as you say. The fact that they are so aggressive about the past shows that at least by part of the Israelis, there is at least the awareness that something went wrong. They wouldn't get into it, but I think this is, if we are looking for encouraging signs, the aggressive reaction, even toward people like me. I always tell them, so there is one journalist who writes lunatic things. Then you have so many others. Don't read me. Why are you so aggressive? What's wrong? So one voice, marginal voice. This aggression is always a good sign. So maybe this can be a good sign. And about the stolen houses, I don't know how many dinners I had in stolen houses. My house is built in Ramat Aviv, which is a neighborhood of Tel Aviv, which used to be a big village called Sheikh Mouanes, a Palestinian village. The swimming pool that I swim every morning at 6 was the pool that had the water, the orchards around. And there's not one single morning that I don't think about it. But I must tell you that any kind of return and any kind of reparation of the crimes should not create new injustice. I don't think that it will be realistic to think that all the Palestinians will be able to get back to the same place where they have been, to the same fields, to the same villages, because then we face a new problem, and I'm not speaking about myself. I'll be so happy to move to somewhere else, but there are millions of Israelis who live there today. Where will they go? What will we do with them? I think that the return can be made, can be possible, but it will not be, meter for meter and house for house. I wish it would be possible. I know one case which I'll never forget, the lemon tree in Ramallah. There was a PLFP leader, him, Imad, who was in jail, and his house was in Ramla. And there was a noble woman who lived there in this house, and one day she decided, she was religious, and one day she decided she wanted to return the house to this guy from Ramallah. He was quite old. I don't think he's alive anymore. Bashir Khiri. Yeah. There was a film. I wrote first the story, and then they made the film. And really a noble step of really offering him to return. I even did this half kitschy step I took. There is still the lemon tree in the garden, and I brought him once a lemon from the tree because he couldn't get there this time. Then he was also in jail for a long time. And finally, he didn't want to take the house, and they made it a kindergarten for Jews and Palestinian children in Ramleh. I don't know what's going on there today, but the house is still there. But this is a nice, noble example, but I don't see it as something that I really wonder, what do you think about it, Ilan? How can this be solved. I think that the return can and should take place, but it will not be exactly to the same, square of land, because someone else is living there. I totally agree with Professor Bereshit that we should go for a new reshuffle of the lands, of compensations, of I don't know what. I don't get to those resolutions because I think we are still so far away.
Okay, so we have...
I want to answer the question.
No, better not.
Better no? Okay.
Because I see all the
Yeah,
people in
I'll
front
be
of me, but
brief.
of course,
I'll be
I'm
brief.
really
Okay,
sorry.
thank you. Especially those that were directed to me. This idea of coming to here and to hear how bad things are, and even to pay money for this, and then to applaud the speakers for telling you how bad things are, must be a bizarre British thing to do. It must be your idea of good time. I'm not in this business, I'm sorry. I'm really not in this business. I'm not going to depress myself, and I'm not going to say that before every Jew becomes de-Zionized, Chaim, there will be peace. Most of the whites in South Africa are still very racist and believe in apartheid. Believe me, I know. I know the place well in South Africa. You did not need to deprogram every white in South Africa in order to change the reality. In fact, quite a lot of racist people in South Africa say now we were always against apartheid. So I don't think that we have to wait until every structure and every aspect of Zionism disappears from the land so that Gideon would write less horrible stories about what's happening. No, I think that this is a very wrong approach. Approach has to be incremental. It has to be through daily activism and resistance. And I agree with Ruba, and the only reason I'm optimistic is because Zionism failed in its most important mission, which was to take over the whole of Palestine and get rid of the Palestinians. Palestine exists, and the Palestinians still are. So Zionism is not such a big success if you check it according to its master plan. According to its master plan, its international legitimacy is questioned, and Gideon, the world is not just diplomats and ministers. I know they think that way, but they're not. The world is made out of other people as well. And that part of the world, which is not part of the political elite, is anti-Zionist, is anti-Israeli, and had enough of this rogue state of Israel. So we have to remember that. And that was not true 25 years ago. That was not. Even in Indonesia and Malaysia, you couldn't talk about Palestine. Now, this is important. The world is not made only of politicians in Washington and in London. There are Southeast Asia, there is Africa, there is Latin America, there are people who are not ministers, who are not diplomats, and these people have changed dramatically their position on Palestine. And if you feel that this is insignificant and tokenism, I disagree with you. I'm sorry. This is not tokenism. This is a significant change in public opinion, and a very important one. I agree. I cannot take this to Jerusalem and tell the children in the high school that this is going to change their life the day after tomorrow. I wish I could. I cannot. But I can tell myself that we are doing something right in order that if it's not the day after tomorrow, then it's next year. And if it's not next year, it's the year after. And if we don't think about this in a holistic way, if the Palestinian resistance movement would say, we are not interested in Jewish members, we're not interested in Israelis, as they did, it's wrong. If the Israelis will not understand that their role is similar to the whites and their relationship with the ANC, and create a one state, not only in ODS in London, but ODS as we are doing. We are creating an ODS on the ground in Israel, which is small. Of course it is small. It's not even reported in your newspaper, which doesn't like ODS, to be honest. It doesn't like me. I wasn't interviewed in this newspaper for the last 9 years. So don't idealize Haaretz. Haaretz has certain people like myself who they would never interview, because They're anti-Zionist through and through. So, but there is the beginning of building a movement from below that is not captive either by nostalgic Palestinian nationalist slogans and not by Zionism. Will this movement get rid of everything Zionist in the next 5 years? No. No, it wouldn't. But with the help of the pressure from the outside, it will create a different reality. I'm quite certain about it. But that doesn't, again, this if you want, this tension between the short term, which is really not boding well, whether it's because of Lieberman or not because of Lieberman, the short term doesn't bode well for anyone who's a Palestinian between the River Jordan and the Mediterranean. There's no question about it. But are the Palestinians victims who will sit passive in front of these next years of Israeli brutality? Do you really think the Palestinians would do nothing? Do you think the very committed anti-Israeli would be the only ones who go to demonstrations? Yes, we have certain detractions. It's true. Syria and Iraq, we have to remember that. We have certain things that help the Israelis to escape the public attention that they would have gotten in any case. But this will return. This will return. This surely will return. And therefore, I think that rather than looking at the Palestinian Museum as an empty building, it should be seen as part of preparation, maybe, for a better time, rather than chastising it now for not having anything in it. It's far more better to say we deserve to have a museum than not. I'm involved in building what is called the Nakba campus in the Galilee. We're building it together with the internal refugees. We know that the Israeli government will not allow it. We know that the Israeli government will not give us license. But we're going to build it. If they're going to destroy it, we will learn from the people of Al-Araqib, and we will build it again, and we will build it again. And we will not stop every day in showing that the reality of the status quo that the Israelis are sanctifying is an evil reality that every decent person there and outside will continue to fight against. This whole idea that the only thing we can do with this reality is tell each other how bad it is and say we don't know how to get out of it is even less helpful for the Palestinians. Let me say one thing about, and with this I will end, about Prevent, because I think Prevent is what one of you guys. Prevent is a very good example of how politics work in the West with regard to Palestine, although it's not about Palestine only, how it works about Palestine. There is a discourse between governments, mainstream academia, mainstream media in this country and in the West in general, which lives outside the reality of the way most people experience it. And we saw a beautiful example in my own university yesterday. Yesterday. The government brought 4 people, 2 of them Muslims, to explain to us that Prevent is the best policy in the world. Especially they asked the Muslim members of the government to explain to us that Prevent was the best thing that ever happened to us. Not one person among the people who listened to these government officials agreed to them. There was not one person among the academics and the student that accepted Prevent. We didn't go as far as Bradford and threw them out, which we should have done. But we did it the Exeter way, which was say yes, yes, and do nothing. There is something in the way that when governments exceed their powers, when they use logic that doesn't resonate with the average person, that they're going to lose these battles, even if they don't going to see that happening immediately. There is a limit to our violation here in this country of our right for our freedom of right, our freedom of expression. And this is true about Palestine as well. If you had a truly, genuinely democratic vote in the West, including in this country, what should be the British government policy in the next 2 years in Palestine? It has no resemblance whatsoever to the policies that the British government has pursued towards the issue of Palestine in the last 10 years. It would have been a very different kind of policy. So we need a European Spring, and urgently, before we talk about an Arab Spring. And we need to get away from all kinds of illusions that there is a disconnection between the quality of politics in this country and the question of Palestine. This atomization of problems in the world does not help the Palestinians. The evils of neoliberalism are also the evils of Zionism. And if we are not going to connect the struggle for social justice, where we have great successes, with the struggle for Palestine, then we will not be able to enhance the local resistance that I was talking about and turning it into a fundamental transformative force.
So I think we collect really 3 more questions, and then that's very scary.
That's too much.
9:30, I think, is a good time to think about ending. For they're very tired. So we have 3. There is one person there who's been really with his hand raised for a long time at this side of the room, which has been neglected. If you can pass, and one young woman in the back, and.
Okay, should I say my question? Yeah? Ready? Yeah? Okay, good. Hi. And firstly, I just wanted to say, I've just been reading your book, Ethnic Cleansing of Palestine, and I'd highly recommend it to everyone here. It's absolutely amazing, brilliant.
I heard it, that's okay.
You should all read The Ethnic Cleansing of Palestine.
Yeah, sorry, definitely. The other thing I wanted to say is, my main question is kind of from your perspective, yeah? Because we see good signs. You mentioned Bernie. I see a lot of young Jews, both sides of the Atlantic, really kind of the next generation, Jews for Justice, etc., and groups like that, which is really, really encouraging. My brother lives in the States, and he tells me about it as well all the time. BDS and the perceived success of that. But what would it actually take for the world's superpowers, whether Europe or US, what would be the tipping point for them? So if you think about the fall of the Berlin Wall, you think about the USSR, you think about all of the big things, South Africa, obviously you've mentioned time and again, what would it really take for them to sit up and take notice and support justice for the Palestinians?
Thank you. Good question. Sorry, it's really impossible to take all the questions, so I'll have to be really quite arbitrary here. And so there is one young man and a young woman and another person here, and then I think we'll have to really wrap up.
You're exercising ageism.
I'll keep it quick because it's getting very warm in here. My question really is about social media and the role that this might play. Gideon, you might be able to answer this more. The role of social media in not just Palestinians sharing their story, but also in it gets harder to deny video evidence of acts of impunity, of IDF soldiers murdering Palestinians in the street. How do you see the role of social media in educating the young Israelis who you would like to educate?
Yes, please.
Yes, thank you for the talk. I have a question related to, I guess, what the young man there was saying. What do you two think about the joint list? Is there a way, for example, if Momentum and Labour invited Ayman Odeh or Khanin Zawabi to a platform, or Podemos did it in Spain, would this empower them? Would this hurt them inside Israeli politics if they were treated as the real opposition instead of a Zionist union? And to go back to something Gideon said at the beginning, we've been speaking in a very binary way about Jews and Palestinians, but there's a section of the Jews, the Ethiopians, for example, the Mizrahim, who have de-Arabized Jews, their culture has been taken away, their language has been taken away, and in the process, they've been denied entry into mainstream Israeli culture. And how do we bring them into it? Because often the most virulent expressions of racism towards Palestinians come from these same Jewish people who themselves have been subjected to racism within the Zionist framework.
One last question there, please.
Yes, further to the PREVENT program, there's a national conference against the PREVENT program on Saturday, 4th of June. Website Challenging PREVENT, so register and attend. But my question refers back to Gideon's analysis of the Israeli anti-BDS campaign as having a twofold motive. One, the desperate need for an enemy to unite the nation, and a response to a genuine sense of psychological humiliation. So I want to ask, how does that humiliation help those who are resisting the colonial apartheid regime? Or perhaps is my question over-optimistic?
Thank you very much. Okay, one more. I'm really one more question there. Women. So okay, let's collect one there, and one here, and then I think we'll have to give. I mean, people are already going away, so.
Okay.
Very short. Please.
Yes, I will, as soon as I can start. My name's Doug Holt, and I work with an organisation called Free Speech on Israel. That's freespeechonisrael.org.uk. And it's about the offensive at the moment against our freedom of speech. I realise that it is an accolade that that our free speech is being attacked. But I also think that one thing that we can do is to resist it, and by resisting it, take the opportunity given to us by the Zionists to keep the issue of Israel alive. Because I don't think that I don't share the optimism that Palestinian youth can take very much more of this. And the new leadership is certainly doesn't have to be persuaded to adopt BDS. They are begging us to do it.
Thank you. They want women to ask questions. I don't know whether this is feminism or sexism, but we will allow a positive view.
Okay, very quick, short question, but the answer might not be that short, but I'm happy for a one-sentence answer. Do you think the one democratic state idea can be can we garner support for it from within the Israeli Jewish population by persuading the Israeli Jews they do have an interest in supporting that, when I think currently what I often hear them saying is they have no interest in it, they're being asked to give up everything they hold dear in return for nothing sort of sentiment. Can we persuade them they have an interest, or does it effectively have to be forced on them in some way through political change and a movement? That's the question.
Okay. I think, let's really give the last word to the gentleman there and then really finish. I'm too democratic. I'm Palestinian, so.
Okay, I'm Irish. A very brief question. In 1989, Ireland held the presidency of the European Union, and European politicians went to Malahide Castle in Dublin for a week and held a conference about German reunification. And the European Union produced a document, virtually a book, about German reunification. Now, my question to the two speakers is, could those of us who are campaigning for a one-state solution for Palestine, for a one democratic state, could this be examined and used by activists to try and bring about a democratic state in Palestine? Finally, it did bring about a one-state solution in Germany. It's a democratic state, and on equal rights, it guarantees equal rights for all citizens. So it would be involved in virtually all of the nations of the European Union.
Thank you very much. So you have a few minutes each to...
Okay. 2 minutes?
No, few minutes to wrap up and answer.
Okay. The tipping points that we are looking for, we are all looking. Always remember the story that Mandela used to say, that it's only when the Berlin Wall fell they realized that really the sanction regime against South Africa can be effective, because that would allow the Americans to join the sanction regime, which exactly is what really finished the story of at least the political apartheid. So it's very difficult to, and nobody predicted the connection between the fall of the Berlin Wall and the end of the apartheid regime. But there was a very important connection. There might be a similar event like this in the future, but my crystal ball is in the car in Exeter. So I don't know which event it will be. But to be honest, I think the tipping point, the two very brief tipping points, which I think are very, very important. One of them is quite obvious, of course. This is a change for whatever reason, doesn't have to be altruistic reasons even, in American policy. And it doesn't necessarily, would not necessarily come from a great belief in the rights of the Palestinians for independence or self-determination or one state. It will come from different reasons, and I think it will happen. America's rule in the world is not determined to be there forever. And I think that would be a great news for us and an important tipping points when America gets out of our life in the Middle East and in Palestine and Israel altogether. Its legacy has been but destruction and ruination on every level. And we tend to forget this, how destructive its presence has been in the Middle East. The second tipping point, I think, once you will hear some of our best friends, some of our very, very good friends, stop talking about the two-state solution, then you know something is happening. When Norman Finkelstein would stop talking about two-state solution, you can start the celebrations. But seriously, I think you need to get rid of this illusion that is a liberal Zionist illusion, that you can square the circle, that you can have a democratic Israel, a kind of a Palestine, and everything is fine, and we have somehow settled all the outstanding problems. We need to feel that this idea has vanished. This is such an important, not always a discursive change, comes as a precursor for political change on the ground. In this case, because the PA still believes in it, because the Israelis still believe in this, because most of the politicians in this country still believe in it, it's a serious impediment for changing the reality on the ground. The joint list, of course, if it would be invited by Podemos, I don't see what it would change much. I mean, it's totally Gideon can tell you more about it than I do. It's totally delegitimized as a political force in Israel. The Palestinian representative in the Israeli Knesset are not calculated in any way as part of the political game. Whatever they tell themselves, it's up to themselves. Why they are there, maybe they're right. I don't want to judge them. It's up to them. But to say in any way, I don't know if you agree with me, to say in any way possible that their presence in the Knesset has any effect on Israeli politics would be a very wrong assumption. That I think so. So they have to decide what they do with this. Obviously, they think it is important for them to be there. Joining the list was very important because, and I'll come back to it in a short moment. BDS enhances everyone inside the Israeli Jewish society that dares to be against what the state believes in, what the majority of the country believes in. In fact, without the BDS, there will be no voices at all that thinks alternatively about the future in Israel and Palestine. This is such an important, I can say it on myself, but I know it on others. It's an enhancer which tells you maybe all the Israelis think that you are lunatic and traitor, but the rest of the world think that you are doing the right thing. That's the message, by the way, for the Israeli Jewish society, and that's why BDS plays such an important role in that respect. Now, I don't have my glasses, which is good, so I'll be shorter. Let me just end by saying that, I know I wanted to come back to this point. The whole idea of the one state should not be portrayed as kind of an ideal life between two communities that suddenly fall in love with each other It's a kind of a happy end for two tribes that fought each other and through kind of a Romeo and Juliet are now kissing cousins forever. It's not. Neither in the Middle East, no political solution we can foresee for Syria or Lebanon would overcome the fact that some people would like to have their own cultural identity, their own ethnic identity, their own religious identity. This is not the issue. The issue is whether you have a practical political framework that is both allows equality but also allows live and let live reality by rectifying past evils. And I think in this respect, if you want, and with this I would end, if you really want a movement of substance to emerge from below that would be similar to the kind of movement you had in South Africa, that includes not only the natives but also the settlers. If you really want it, the first thing you need is not just a successful BDS. You need a clear redefinition of the project of the liberation of Palestine. And the only people who can redefine what liberation means in 2016 are the Palestinians themselves. And don't tell me that they are doing it, because they are not doing it. Maybe there are good reasons why they're not doing it, but until we hear, in fact, and that relates to the Mizrahi Jews as well. Someone asked about the Arab Jews, the Mizrahi Jews. Until you don't explain, and there isn't a Palestinian explanation to the Israeli Jews, whether they are Moroccan Jews or they were born in Israel. There is no clear Palestinian message that tells them what is the future. They go to Ramallah, they tell them the future is a two-state solution. They go back to Haifa and say, so Haifa is the same, right? That's what the PA says. Haifa doesn't change. So why should they bother about anything, even if they are among the very few who are willing to think about the future? Who among the Palestinians can answer the question, what is the project of liberation? I can phone the Israeli embassy and the Israeli ambassador who tell me in 2 minutes what is the Israeli vision of the future. Don't try call the Palestinian embassy and ask what is the vision for the future.
That's a sign of democracy, though.
It's a sign of democracy.
You are under hegemonic.
Yeah, okay.
Zionist
It's a sign of democracy, and yet the ANC had a clear project of liberation. You need a clear and
but it's not fair because I can't play the voice of the Palestinian here, so it's a bit unfair to have this criticism. And I'm just the chair. So
no, it's not criticism. It's. I wish it were criticism. It's a desperate call. It's a desperate call for the Palestinians to lead us together, and we are doing it. We're also active in it.
Well, the Palestinians launched the BDS in 2005 and 2004.
Yes, that's not really, but yes, okay. For historical records, yes. Okay.
That's important.
It's not true, but it's important.
The Pappé was launched.
Never mind. Okay. Yeah. Good.
About the role of social media, like many other things in our world, it goes to both directions. On one hand, social media and mainly projects like B'Tselem, the human rights organization, Israeli human rights organization, of spreading video cameras to many volunteers in the West Bank and in Gaza, created certain contribution to exposing the Israelis to the truth. It was mainly with the last soldier who is now in so-called trial, who shot the Palestinian dead. Without the video of the volunteer, this wouldn't even become an issue, and it became an issue in Israel. Not always a very promising issue, but at least it's being discussed. And without social media, this wouldn't have happened because it all started in social media. Social media forces many times the traditional media to follow it and to publish, because this video, I'm not sure, would have been published in Israeli TV, but after it was spread in social media, they had no other choice but to screen it. And on this aspect, it has very positive role also to confronting the Israelis with the reality that they deny. In the same time, social media, at least in Israel, became a legitimate forum, a legitimate platform for the worst expressions of racism, which are spread, really pathological expressions of racism that I would be even ashamed to quote here. The worst of the worst you can imagine yourself, even worse than what you can imagine yourself. And this has a destructive role because, you know, we don't know how many people stand behind it, but it becomes legitimate in a way because it is in the media. I remember still in the 50s and the 60s, we have this humorist, Kishon, who once wrote this humoresque about the burning of the Union building, Binyan Ha'Histadrut, the burning of the Union building, and someone calls his friend and says, the building of the Union is burning, and he says, no, but I heard it now in the radio. But he says, no, I'm standing in front of it, it's not burning. No, but I heard it in the radio. And it goes on and goes on. Hearing it at the radio made it real, even though the other one stands in front of the building. Same happens now with the dialogue in the social media, which in most of the cases is a sick dialogue. Social media, for example, published, one of those websites published that my father was a collaborator with the Nazis. Now, I will not get into the details. No traditional media would have ever published it without checking. I mean, I can't think about something more far-fetched than this, but social media was a platform to publish it. And then, you know, it spread, and then you don't know where it stops. So it goes to both directions. It has a positive role, but it has also a negative role, and we have to face both. BDS for activists all over, I think, is a source of hope, because any progress is a source of hope, and therefore any success of BDS is a source of hope and encouragement and energy for activists elsewhere, and mainly, obviously, in Palestine. To persuade the Jews in Israel for the one-state solution is right now looks like something really out of this world, really out of this world. But if we can change roles now for the end of the evening, I can tell you, if you would have invited me, Blake, in the late 80s to this place, most of the people were not born yet, but those who were born here. And I would have claimed here tonight that apartheid system is going to fall, Soviet Russia is going to fall, and the Berlin Wall is going to fall within months. I can assure you, Blake, you would have never invited me again, because nobody had foreseen it. So if to end it up in a more optimistic way, many times historical processes, those that you made your career on, don't just develop gradually and gradually. Many times something happens and things really change dramatically. And this is a source of hope. And if this is not enough, I can quote someone who says that in our part of the world, one should be realistic enough to believe in miracles. And what do we need more than miracles? I even think about myself. 2 years ago, I spoke totally different, both about BDS and about the one-state solution. And I know how I got to it. Mainly, I will not, it's too late now to get to it. It was few visits in South Africa. It was some people who influenced me. If I can mention, there's a very dear friend of mine who sits here tonight, Imad Saba, whom we met first in the Israeli military jail. Imad was administrative detainee. He smuggled me. He's tired already to hear this story again and again. But it is a story that should be told again and again. Imad smuggled letters from jail to me. Just yesterday, I realized that they were smuggled by people who swallowed it, visited him in jail, swallowed it. They were fantastic, both the handwriting, this tiny handwriting, and the very thin paper. I couldn't see that it lied in a stomach of somebody. But I got these amazing letters, and then in some way, I succeeded to visit him in jail, and happened what happened. We will not get into it. And Imad is an exile, a Palestinian exile, and he was. And if there was between us some kind of argument, it was always about one state, two states. And I remember that I saw that Imad is going too far. Imad was with the Popular Front. Now we can say you were with the Popular Front, or they will arrest you again for this. And in any case, a lifetime friendship came out of it, but also some kind of political influence, I guess. So I want to thank you for being here tonight, Imad. And and to thank you all, because I can tell you that for me personally, evening like this really encourage me and really charge me with a lot of energy. I wish I could say the same about my own society. There I can't find so much sources of hope and encouragement, but really evenings like this are for me, for us, extremely important, and thank you for coming.
Sharing a long, long time. Well, with those two, it's like tiger,
And I want to on the table.